Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. I have a brand new guest on. Her name is Lee Granade. The 14th Judicial Circuit in South Carolina has enabled the Murdaughs to prosper since the 1920s. They've been tied to moonshine and interference with juries, as well as other malfeasance. Now, her ex's connections with that family go back to the 1970s. Lee has lost her children and everything to a man whose own child from his first marriage, a police officer, has testified for Lee. Long documented domestic violence history, demoted at federal government, and suspended without pay for his treatment of women on disability for conduct disorder, and so much more. He took in a new wife of 5 months after divorce and then burned the house down with Lee and his son, then 11 years old, who had been left alone in that house moments earlier. There was no police report, no change in custody, nothing. The ex's college roommate is the county attorney who represents the police. They made it all go away. However, Lee got a FOIA, which is Freedom of Information Act. She got their policies and pointed out they violated about 6 of them. Then she went to them with subpoenaed insurance documentation, which showed where insurance was paid to her ex and herself because she was still an owner at the time of the unexplained fire at the house. And they took an incident report, but refused to charge that too. And I welcome you to my podcast, Lee. Where and how did you get involved with all of this?
Oh, goodness. Unfortunately, it started about 5 years ago this month. Actually, my son had just been he had just been in the hospital for what I learned was rumination disorder, which I had never heard of, but the stress was so bad at home that he was sometimes vomiting 10, 20 times a day. So it was clear to me that I had to do something. I had stayed to essentially buffer the children. I guess that was more evidence that I wasn't able to do it. So around this time, I started devising a plan to leave. I obtained the restraining order with help from the local domestic violence group. I had my attorney ready to go. This was back in Georgia, when we lived in Middle Georgia. Um, my church had even helped me secure a private security guard. I had GPS trackers. I had a PI in place. I had a rental home in a gated community, 100 or so miles away. I had everything ready. He was served. Kids and I were running, and I was just told him. I picked him up early from school. I said, "We're going away. We're going to just take a break, and we're going to go away." And because my whole goal was always just to protect them physically as well as emotionally, spiritually, and everything. We did that. Um, I I tell people it's the worst mistake I ever made, but I took the counsel of church friends who you can imagine my ex sought out, and they're my church people. And so at the time, I had a lot of respect for them, and they pleaded with me to drop the restraining order, which I did.
Mm.
At the time that was done, I had shown, and I hate that I've even had to go this route, but I had structured geofences within the GPS device. I had the PI on him so that he had broken it 20 different ways within an hour of being served that restraining order. And again, that kind of underscores, and I think clarifies a little bit what I'm up against. I'm up against somebody that doesn't believe rules and laws apply to him. But I rescinded it. I
Mhm.
rescinded it, and 6 hours later, I was calling the police, and I have not had the upper hand ever since then. fast forwarding a little bit, the next summer, I thought, my daughter's very, both my kids are athletic and enjoy sports and competing, but Lily was, she had some talent with tennis, and she had been offered a scholarship for one of the tennis academies on Hilton Head. So my thought was, well, I'll go to Hilton Head. I'll run away with the kids and he'll approve that, and we can get some time apart. And then at least the kids can, not be exposed to what he's doing to us at home. And I should say too that he did have a lot of work, I guess, issues, demotions, trouble. He was a retired Army officer. His background, he was in Cuba, born in Cuba. He was first in the Navy. He had been stationed at Beaufort, South Carolina, which is the 14th Circuit, in the late 1970s, at the time the Great Santini was being filmed, if you're familiar with that movie. And I question how much that contributed to kind of his model. I mean, he's basically a Spanish Great Santini, unfortunately. Coming from Cuba, there was, I didn't know a lot of this. I only found out when we were going through the divorce. But being stationed in Beaufort in the late 1970s is where he had run around with, the Murdaugh group. And, at least 3 of them became attorneys, local attorneys. One became the county attorney. One became Alec Murdaugh, who is known internationally now for his, I don't even know what to say, for his alleged murders, drug trafficking, theft, fraud. I mean, so he let it be known when the children and I moved and things were again going badly between us. He let it be known, I know people, Lee, and this is me being very naive or worse, dumb, I just ignorant, and thinking, well, the rule of law is still what it is. And I kept copious documentation. I had boxes, I had folders categorized by threats, threats or injuries, or I even had his own notarized documentation saying I shouldn't be left alone with the children. I had so much. I had his work records. I had his mental health disability forms. I mean, who gets a conduct disorder? I mean, that's just a lack of self-control. I had everything. I thought there's no way that this won't turn out the right way for the children and me. And here I am. So I had underestimated that connection there in the 14th Circuit that he had had since the 70s, because I didn't know him to be in regular communication with this group of people. But as soon as that litigation started, I very, very quickly learned that I was in for a real fight.
That's very stressful. What a shame. You're still battling this.
I did. Well, I am, and I did. And so that was 2017. The children and I were getting situated in a home. My ex, Robert, would come in and out occasionally. But when he did file, he let it be known that, and even before he filed, that was part of my restraining order back the year prior, that he let it be known that if you ever try to leave me, you'll never see the children again. I'm going to ruin you. The quote that's on file, I guess, at the courthouse is, I'm going to leave you penniless and you'll never see the children again. Even still, I just trusted that people would do the right thing. I retained an attorney, gosh, I guess sometime that fall. I still did not have the strength to go forward myself. I think my hope was always that I could threaten him. I could, I could sweet talk him. I could threaten him. I could whatever. I could control the environment enough that I could stay married and I wouldn't have to go through it, because I knew it would be bad. I didn't realize it would be this bad. And I completely underestimated the corruption among the courts and the police and such. But ultimately, he filed.
Mm.
He filed, and I was on the defensive from day one, and I um I I don't even know where to start, but I'll try, and you just guide me if I'm rambling. But things such as discovery, like
Mhm.
I had to produce discovery, which was, I mean, I want to say it was maybe 40 or 50 pages of itemized with subparts of all these things that I had to produce. And I thought, this is completely overwhelming. And I mean, it
Mhm.
was hundreds of hours of work. And I did it. And I'd give it to my attorney, and then I'd ask my attorney to file similarly against for the same discovery against him. And like one example is even, every text message between my mom and my sister and me. Well, that's a lot of text messaging, but I did it. And I would ask my attorney to do it and to do the same. So I thought, what's good for me is good for him, right?
Mhm.
But he refused and declined. And so things didn't happen. And I would use his discovery that he served me with, or that I was to comply with, and I would modify it, and I'd say, okay, well, I'd like for you to serve this, this is what I expect of my ex. And he's
Mhm.
like, well, you can't do that. And I was like, well, why was it done to me?
Mhm.
Why was it done to me? Um, Meanwhile, as you can imagine, I'm hemorrhaging cash, hemorrhaging cash. My ex had reported fraud on me. So obviously we had accounts together, but then we had accounts that he primarily used, I primarily used, and so forth. At the very beginning of the litigation, I said, this is going to go badly. And I said, I'm going to grab, it was 5 or 10,000 from a joint account that I put into my kind of my everyday account. And when I did that, he called USAA Bank, and he's obviously the retired officer, and he told them that that was done fraudulently. And I stole his, I know after 20 years of marriage, I must have stolen his PIN. And would you believe that USAA froze? Well, USAA allowed me to be removed from that account, in addition to freezing the little account that my part-time work checks went into. So I had no access to money. And the bills that I had, was amazing how quickly this happened. So I
Mhm.
had a little credit card here to credit card here, and I just had automatic payments set up that as your account gets frozen and those payments don't happen or are kicked back, you're done. That credit card company doesn't want you. So I had no money, no access to money. My credit was actively um, falling away, just precipitously, just crumbling. I had nothing. How do I fight? So my family stepped in. They did a lot. They did so much, and they kept me afloat. So temporary hearings happened, and if you can imagine, and I'm sorry if my chronological account is sort of haphazard, but it's
That's okay.
May of 18. was the emergency hearing. So in the emergency hearing, at least in South Carolina, it's called a trial by ambush because you don't have any discovery. You don't know what the other party is bringing to the table. So I didn't know what he was bringing to the table. And he alleged abuse by me of our daughter. Well, how did he do that? Well, he dragged our daughter to an LPC, a licensed professional counselor, who at the time was not even licensed, did not even hold a South Carolina license. It had lapsed. Took her to this person and said for our daughter to tell that mom kept her in the garage. Well, you know, there were instances where both of my kids would get in arguments or fights or whatever, and you know, their rooms were, you know, it was 70 degrees and comfortable. So I was like, you know what, go sit in the garage.
Mhm.
I mean, it had plantation shutters. It was insulated. There was a fridge in there. There was a button to open the garage door, or they could have just come inside. Did I have them sit out there with a bottled water in the garage for 30 minutes? Yeah, I did that, but to me, it worked.
Mhm.
Another thing that I would do is if the kids were really out of control is I'd say, okay, well, that just got you an hour of scrubbing baseboards.
Mhm.
Very non-emotional. I'd never rip them up emotionally. I would, you know, verbally, I was always very sensitive, but I would say, you know, here's your bucket. See you in an hour. You know, and I actually had stolen that from another mom down the street because nobody likes to scrub baseboards, right? And it made sense. So that was what he alleged was the abuse. And that was enough to get the emergency hearing. In the emergency hearing, they demanded that a guardian ad litem be assigned. Well, I was, again, ignorant, trusting my attorney, trusting the system. And I said, sure, you know, I read what a guardian does, and it makes total sense that the guardian will investigate this. The guardian will do the right thing. The guardian will consider both sides for sure. Absolutely. And her name's Catherine Ferguson of the law office of Ferguson and Ferguson in Beaufort, South Carolina. The court also endorsed the services of Dr. Brooke Dean, a psychologist out of Beaufort, married to the reputable orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Dean. And so the guardian, the psychologist were to work with us and figure out the best thing for our children. So I really felt like this is all going to work out just fine. I'm not worried at all. Quickly, I was told the guardian didn't like me. The psychologist didn't like me, which I'm kind of like, well, doesn't matter. I'm not here to make friends. I'm not here to, I'm not looking for a new girlfriend. I'm looking for them to do their job and do the right thing.
Mhm.
A friend of mine that was actually at the emergency hearing that broke hard my way, actually, because the emergency hearing, that judge said, you all are going to go and do the nesting for the children, which means I have the home 1 week, my ex has a home 1 week. So we would swap out. That way the children were right there. The children didn't leave their home. And I was on a week, my ex was on a week. So, and the other thing that the judge brought up was my portion of equitable distribution of my ex's retirement. And I thought, at the time I thought, this is odd a little bit, but the judge looked at my attorney, who I now know, his name's William Randall Phipps, or Randy Phipps, categorically lazy, not just lazy, but he just lives part-time on the island. There's a lot of deep pockets on Hilton Head Island. Obviously, I wasn't one of them. but he lives in the mid part of the state, Newberry, South Carolina. That's his home, but he stays in a hotel a couple nights a week in Hilton Head, presumably to get what he can from women struggling like me.
Mm-hmm.
So Randy Phipps, who I know now, Judge Fuge, who has recently died, but the Honorable Judge Fuge looked at Randy Phipps and said, have you all worked out her portion of the equitable distribution yet? And he said, no. And he's like, well, I don't see it in this, in your, I don't see it in what you've provided the court. I don't see it. I don't see that you're asking for it. Don't you need to?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I guess so. And he's like, well, how much is she entitled? And he's like, figure it out. Had that judge not done that, literally that's all the support that I get monthly from him, which is oddly enough, just enough to offset my child support, which is computed. I know it's computed at, gosh, over twice what I've ever made. And what I learned in that,
typical.
you're right. What I learned in that was, that's a very effective strategy to choke me out financially,
Mm-hmm.
Not just socially, but also financially choke me out, because that makes it almost impossible, because I'm struggling for so long. And I'm better now, but I struggled just to live. I struggled to keep the power on, struggled to keep my phone paid for. I struggled, both of which were disconnected at times. And I don't say this to try to garner sympathy, but just as more of an education that I wish I'd had, that if they can choke you out financially, they're going to keep trying, and it's going to get worse, and you better be ready, and you better have a place to run to. Like eviction notices were normal there for a while. I hadn't worked full time essentially since my children were born. So the first job I got was, gosh, I think the offer was $35,000 as full time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my child support was calculated at 72. So I would work multiple jobs, and even, I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but when the final judgment came, I was awarded a good portion of the 401k, but I had to be able to hire someone to go through that documentation and draft up the orders, petition the court, get the quadro done, the qualified domestic relations order, so that I could be privy to it. And even then, my ex petitioned the TSP, the Thrift Savings Plan, which is the federal government's 401k, to delay it or not to approve it, not for any reason, just to further delay me in getting money to live. And you get tired of asking friends, you get tired of asking family, and I just was like, okay, well, I can do without for this long, or I could, it's a real, it's even if they didn't believe the abuse part that was documented by my medical doctors, or was documented by my ex himself, or was captured in videos or text messages or whatnot, even if they hadn't believed all of that, look at what he's doing after the fact. You know what I mean? And so I jumped around. I changed jobs probably, 3 or 4 times since then in those 4 years, just in an attempt to get my salary up, get my, to just kind of recreate what I can offer. And would you believe that the second job that I took, I moved over to Augusta, Georgia, home of the Masters. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but this was at the time that my ex wanted the deed transferred because the home had burned down. So would you believe that when we were over there, he is gonna sending PI, sending uh, process servers, whatever, to get me to sign off on this deed, where I'm saying I'm not going to sign it. I'm not going to sign it till I see an investigation, which obviously never happened. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so I will let you get me back on track if you don't mind, Marian.
Oh, that's fine. So, and your son that was in that home, he got out in time.
He did.
Yeah.
Um, right. So the litigation that happened from 2018 to 2019, it left me even without what was in my closet. Family heirlooms. I told my attorney and I told the court, I said, I don't want to disrupt Lillian Williams' home. So if I'm not able to get this home, then I want to leave, this butcher's block. I want to leave this secretary. I want to leave this 4-poster bed. I want to leave all these things for my children because that feels like home. I want to leave the artwork. I want to leave, I'll leave these things. So that, not thinking it would happen, right? Not ever thinking that it would come to that. But obviously it did. The guardian ad litem, I cannot recommend against that enough because they can lie to the court all day long and there's absolutely nothing that you can do. You can turn her into the bar, which I've done, and the bar says, because she's functioning as a GAL, guardian ad litem, you need to take this back to the court. Well, the court's the one that caused this.
Right.
So what can I do? And, I'm still fighting that. I've written her and told her I plan to sue her. I've asked her, I've sent her a request to reconcile for some damages, as well as the $49,000 she charged our family in less than 12 months to create 2 reports that were both late to the court, which the statute provides for a certain amount of time that her reports need to be in to the court. I believe it's 10 days, but not an expert, it may be 14. Well, hers were provided hours before the court hearing. Exactly why my attorney didn't challenge it, I have my own theories. And I even remember telling her it was because she would have to get an approval from the court to be able to turn things in late. And the first time I remember saying, okay, whatever, I'm on board. The second time I said, no, absolutely, I want to prove you being late. And she's like, well, why are you being difficult? And I said, well, based on the first report, I'm going to need every day of that 14 days in order to help counter the lies that I expect from you. So, based on seeing your first report, and even worse, after the first report, I sent her a little chart and I said, this is what you alleged. This is the truth. This is where it's documented. Catherine, you have, you said in your report that you retained the right to amend it should additional information become available. Well, here's additional information. Why do I have to be so nasty? And why am I having to ask you to do the right thing again and again and again? And yet, it never happened. She just chose to ignore me. And I gave her charts. This is what you said. This is where it's wrong. And this is how I can show you what's wrong. And this is how you can make it right. It was literally just all she had to do was copy and paste after she independently verified. And I'm learning now as I prepare to sue both her and my attorney, and some others, I'm learning when immunity stops. And, obviously it's an uphill battle for me to try to educate myself as such, but, she had information and she withheld it from the court. Immunity doesn't apply. And I hate that I'm having to do this. I would have never thought I'd had to do this, but if you're if you're if you're hurting my children, I'm going to do whatever I can. And this woman, Catherine Ferguson, if you look her up, she's relatively attractive, I guess, relatively plain, kind of young, doesn't really, not flashy. She might dress in Talbots or Ann Taylor or whatnot. And, just she's on the board at her children's charter school. She is, since I started complaining to the bar about her, now she's on a committee at the bar. But anyway, in that very first hearing, I had a friend in the parking lot who, she's like, Lee, I just overheard something. Your ex was walking out with his attorney. They didn't see me. And I heard them say, you don't need to worry about what he says, which was the male judge, Judge Fuge. You just need to worry about what she says. Well, the only other she was the guardian. Because, it was, my attorney was male. So my ex would, in between that or after that emergency and temporary hearing and such, there were times that he came to me and I started recording conversations. Actually, I started years prior when his volatility really kind of got out of control. I was recording him as he told me, guardian's taken care of. You don't have a chance. Custody's been set. Don't you think I have friends, Lee? You need to go away. Well, that was after he was, will you reconcile? No, I really don't want to reconcile anymore. And he said, and this is recorded, I don't want those effing kids. Recorded. I don't want those effing kids, but I'm mad at you, Lee. I want my sweet, kind wife back. I don't want those effing kids. So, again, he did not want them, but he said, I'm mad at you. And, here's the thing. If you can't be around me to hurt me, then you're going to hurt my children. And the kids were acting up. I mean, I have sweet, gentle, soft-hearted children that are into, we rescue wild animals. We take them to rehabbers. Yes, they're flawed. We're all flawed. I get it. But my children were genuinely just sweet, kind. However, they're terrified of daddy. And I get it. I get it. Dad grew up, if you've heard the term roots to fruits, which I bet you have, growing up in an abusive home in Cuba where mom gave birth at age 10. He sent off to work camps from the time of 5 and on. This is roots to fruits. My children there's no telling what anger might look like towards my children. So did my children have to act up? Absolutely, they did. Did he tell me in a recorded conversation, if you don't reconcile, it's going to get worse? Did I present that to the court? I did. What kind of parent, what kind of parent would say, I'm going to make our children act abusively, worse, more reckless, if you do not reconcile with me, Lee? I think, or I don't want those effing kids.
But yet he wants the child support.
And not even the child support, it's a few $100s. It's, it's $600 or $700. He, between his disability, between his pensions, between his current GS-15 position out of Charleston, he makes upwards of $250,000 a year. It's not, I don't even know that. I wouldn't say that's his motivation. Knowing him, I would say his motivation is Lee is miserable. Lee's miserable without her children. And it's hard to, it's hard to breathe. It's hard to, for the longest time, I couldn't go into grocery stores. So my family's barking at me like, and I just go grab some fast food here or there, but I would order a pizza because I'd go through the grocery store and then I'd look at my buggy and I'd be like, these are all things that I was used to buying for my children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As a dietitian, they were pretty picky eaters. So you just want your kids to grow and you want them to enjoy food. And I'd look at my buggy and I'd have these things, and then it would occur to me that they're not with me.
Mm.
And there were times that I just had to, leave my buggy, put the groceries back, and I just quit going. I quit going to the
Yeah.
grocery store, or whatever. So, or I'd go to a dollar store or something that didn't like a grocery store. But he knew what he was doing, and he did proceed to hurt the children.
Do you see them at all?
So, um, the final judgment came down in um, June of 19. So June of 19, we had a 4-day final hearing. If you can imagine, they brought in a visiting judge to the 14th Circuit. That visiting judge had actually just recently been elected, and the only potential challenger, I'm sorry, not elected, but appointed. So subsequently, after she was appointed, then she would have to run for re-election. That visiting judge, her name's Mindy Zimmerman, out of Newberry, South Carolina, which was the home of my attorney, which he was the only declared competitor. That's not the word I'm looking for. He was the only competition or opponent. He was the only person who had declared an intent to run against her. So obviously a conflict of interest, a big, huge conflict of interest, that you're going to bring somebody from, 180 miles away to preside over a case against the only attorney who's ever declared his intent to run against you. But again, here I am trusting the process. Well, I did lose everything. I couldn't even go back into the house to get my clothes or jewelry that remained. I could not, I wasn't even allowed to go into the plantation. It's a gated plantation with manned security. I wasn't even allowed to go to the home to look to see, to pull into the driveway. I was, by court order, I had to be at the Panera Bread, a 1.5 miles from my ex's home in Hilton Head. And
Oh, I can't hear you.
I was given a Mercedes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I lost you for a second. I don't know if there was a lag in the Zoom or not. Sorry.
Okay. So I was given a Mercedes that had about 250,000 miles on it, and essentially nothing other than 2/3 of the 401k, which I could not access without going back to court.
Oh, yeah.
I think at the time I might have owed that attorney another, or he claims I owed him another maybe 55,000. So basically I got absolutely nothing. I lost my children. The children lost their private school. They lost everything. I lost my home. I lost the inheritance I'd put into the home. We lost everything. So the court order read that based on my ex's testimony, which I'll expand on that a little bit later if we have time, but based on my ex's testimony, which she believed that my daughter and I had a very contentious relationship, which couldn't have been further from the truth. But what he told me was, my ex told me, South Carolina defers to the oldest to establish custody. And Lily's the oldest, and so you'll never see her again. Well, So he fabricated that we had a bad relationship, which again could not have been further from the truth. But and even literally 4 days prior to our last separation, Lily had sent me a text message because I was at the outlet mall and I was shopping for shoes because she had her first dance. So I was bringing her shoes to try on, and she sent me a text message with lots of little sad crying faces. And I'm happy to share that with you, which is obviously date stamped. And it says, "Mom, please come home. I'm kind of scared of Dad right now."
Mm.
And I had been gone for less than an hour. And again, that was just one. That was just one. I mean, I had videos. I had the children and me. I had it all. So it's not that my daughter and I ever had a bad relationship, nor was that ever it's a claim.
Mhm, mhm,
But the court gave it credence. And what I have learned is that judges are not privy to exert their discretion when there's a rule of law that exists. And the rule of law was frankly avoided, ignored, trashed in my case,
mhm.
and it was all discretion.
Mm,
Strong, or has a vested interest, which obviously I didn't have deep pockets, then he's not going to challenge that. He wants to be in good with that judge.
mhm,
So again, I've been pro se now for several months, and I'm like, why didn't I do this earlier? Nobody's going to fight harder than me.
mhm.
And why? And the judges hate it. I get it. And I'm kind of worried on the 13th when I'm in front of them again. I'm kind of worried, are they going to threaten me? Are they going to try to intimidate me? Well, that's almost impossible to do anymore because I've gone to nothing. I mean, it's not even important how I turn out. It's not even important. It's my children are really all that. They're all that's important.
Mhm.
So, getting back to your question, and I apologize for the ramble, the
Mm,
judge said that I had to go to reunification counseling with my daughter. I said, sure, absolutely.
mhm,
She's believed there to be an expert in Charleston, South Carolina. Her name is Helen Wheeler. She is, she's been around for a minute. She is also an LPC. She claims to be an expert and calls her facility the Center for Families. Helen Wheeler would um, she'd set up appointments, and I was at every one. There's no disputing that. Absolutely at every one. My ex, again, I don't know what he did. I don't know what he did, but he never brought our daughter. My ex and I had to be there for counseling, and
mhm.
he declined to bring her. Helen, to her credit, one day said, Lee, I want to meet with you privately. I want to talk about your relationship with your daughter, Lily. I said, yes, ma'am, I'm there. And I had videos, I had messages, I had photos, I had Lily's letters to me, I had everything. But in that, I also showed her why Lily would be scared of her dad.
Mhm,
It was very, and I said, look at this incident, Helen. Look at
mhm,
this and look at these injuries and listen to this. Listen, listen here, listen, watch. And I don't know that, well, I think I do know that most people, even who claim to be experts in the family, are not equipped to deal with complicated domestic violence, or maybe domestic violence in general. And my ex has a couple of graduate degrees. He wants, he's pretty sly.
mhm,
And so from that point on, Helen essentially sided with my ex. And my ex used the excuse that I did not participate in counseling with my daughter, which was court ordered. And I said I was there.
Yeah.
I was there all the time. I had no access. That was the only access I was afforded by the court until Thanksgiving of 19. And at that time, we were to resume regular visits with Lily. Obviously, I've always had regular visits with William, but when he agreed to it. But with Lily, I was not afforded that. So he has used that successfully to say, even though it's not true, even though it's, I had no access to my daughter, how do I provide her for counseling? But he's even gotten a statement from Helen that, these reunification meetings between Lee and her daughter did not happen. Well, Helen, why did they not happen? And if you're appointed by the court, don't you have some kind of obligation to inform the court when one person is completely delinquent? But, then I'm labeled as difficult. And she even called me that in a message I subpoenaed between her and my ex. And so to answer you, I only see my daughter when my ex kicks her out of the home. So it's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. I have gotten the police involved to bring her. I hate doing that because it's traumatic for her. So I just keep trusting that either the court will see where they need to make a wrong right, or they're going to give me something that can go to an appellate court and set this right. And this time it will be me going to an appellate court and figuring it out when I get there. So that is the working plan. It's I still text her essentially every day. I send her gifts a couple times a month. I Venmo her. I send her DoorDash. She communicates she used to communicate more regularly than she does now. She's not allowed to go to school. I know, against the court order. I know my ex keeps her at home. I've got documentation from this homeschool program that she just didn't show up for weeks. She's supposed to graduate in this year, meaning the spring. I did turn all that into DSS. I turned it into the court. I will be turning it into the court again. The other thing that I do, Marianne, is I live extremely simply, and I have chosen to spend money on retaining experts to provide me with affidavits, to sort through. I go around and I gather my children's medical records. I gather their school records. I've had fake social media profiles, or have friends that, have found my children on social media or such. Really boxes of evidence of where the children have been exposed to abuse and neglect. And I do have a Duke and Vanderbilt trained forensic psychiatrist on retainer. And he said, this is absolutely neglect. He said, and this is not based on my opinion. He said, this is objective data. I had Georgia people may recognize the term CHOA, which is Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, but I sent the children's medical records there. And I said, here are their growth charts. They came back with, or one of their providers came back with, absolutely, this is failure to thrive, not just of one child, but of 2 out of 2 children from the time that mother left or was expelled from the home. Both of them meet criteria for failure to thrive. So my daughter, at the time that the final hearing happened, I did not realize that she needed a root canal, because the preceding year with my ex, he had chosen to not get her compromised area in one of her molars repaired. This was in December of 18 that he had been referred to the endodontist. Would you believe that man waited until the day after he learned he's one big, that summer of 19, before he schedules that appointment? Well, the endodontist immediately recognizes the urgency, My daughter has to get her root canal
Mm.
the next day at 14. 14, she has to get a root canal. So a dentist has also, he's not just a dentist, he's also a PhD and has had his own practice around Atlanta for 25 years. And he also submitted an affidavit to the court of absolutely, this is dental neglect.
Mm-hmm.
And I coupled that when I sent him the information, I coupled that with, look at this information from USTA. As I mentioned, my daughter was a tennis player, and especially callous, as a protective mama, I think that he enrolled my daughter in a tennis tournament less than a day after this root canal.
Oh my.
You know, tennis was his, that's why he was on Beaufort back in the 70s and running with the Murdaughs and that crowd. He had her in a tennis tournament, not just for children 14 and younger. He had her in a tennis tournament playing 18 and older girls, to which she had to default because of pain. And that's documented by USTA. So the dentist expert, the psychiatrist, he's also been a medical director in Georgia hospitals, the registered licensed dietitian, who's also a certified specialist in pediatrics. There's also Judge Ashley Wilcott, which some of your listeners may recognize that name from Court TV. But my family had retained her for her ability and her expertise as a child welfare legal specialist. And that's the CWLS credential, which only a handful of judges, attorneys have, I'm told. You know, still be an expert and help me navigate this. But Ashley Wilcott, we may have lost internet for a second.
I'm here.
Okay. Ashley, Judge Wilcott also submitted a very eloquent, detailed affidavit to the court saying, oh, essentially what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
This is abuse, neglect, and I'm concerned about other things that I'm gonna not share, you know, and on this platform, just out of protection from my, you know, I don't want to, my children could see this one day, but as bad as you can imagine, those are the things that Judge Wilcott was worried about. And I'll mention too that Judge Wilcott was retained as an expert in my final hearing. Would you believe that my attorney would not allow her to testify?
Your own attorney.
Right. Right. Who was apparently on the take. So I'm still fighting. My daughter turned 18 on Tuesday. I sent her gifts. I sent her a cake, and but wasn't allowed to even eyeball her or for her 15th, 16th, or 17th birthday. So, but she knows she's loved, and my family signed the card. You know, I just do the best I can.
Mm-hmm. It's very difficult. So are you gonna, did you say you're gonna sue your attorney for really messing this up?
I am. I have to, I've learned how to kind of triage this. I have to triage. I'm just me. I joke that, you know, I really need like 14 of me and a few paralegals, but that's not my situation. So yes, I absolutely plan to sue them. And I plan to make it public. I plan to sue SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Fast forwarding a little bit, our divorce was final. It was filed with the court in July of 19. And December of 19, my ex had married his paramour, or one of them. And in, I think it was December the 27th of 19 was his marriage. On January the 19th of 2020, I returned my son to his dad at Panera, and I returned back home. Well, I actually was meeting someone in downtown Savannah that night, and so I was trying to be, polite and had my phone silenced, but I noticed my phone's blowing up, and it's a friend of mine from the hospital, and one of his nurses is trying to get in touch with me because she lived down the road from me, and she knew me better than I knew her, and she was calling to tell me that my home was on fire.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And I think it was months, Marianne, before it really kind of registered, because all I could think was, oh, it must have been lightning, or it must have been something in the fireplace, or it must have been all these things. But as the shock wore off and I could process information, it was none of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I had returned my son at, I believe it was 6 o'clock that day, may have been 7. I have to check my records, but which would have put him back to home by 7:15 at the latest. And I believe the first 911 call happened around 7:30. And come to find out, my ex had apparently left my son at home alone and claimed to be at the dog park with new wife and the dog at the time the fire happened. It was an hour and a half after sunset, and the dog park did not have lights.
Mm-hmm.
He made the claim to the fire investigator, which I've gotten by subpoena, that he had a very vigorous fire burning that day. My son said to a friend who gave me an affidavit that said that dad told me to watch the fire as it went out. So that home was a 1970s home, but it had been completely reconstructed. We'd had a very clean inspection just months prior to our separation, which was the year prior. There was no problems with the flue. There was no problems.
Right.
So the children aren't allowed to tell me anything that goes on in dad's home. Hence, the neighbor called me to tell me about the fire. I had a fireman friend and other friends who got me a pass to the plantation so I could see it for myself the next day. We're there, and with this fireman, I go to the local fire department and can't get any information. I want to think I've gotten more savvy through either FOIA or the power of subpoenas, so that I have been able to get enough information. I don't. It's a lot, Marianne. I have.
It's okay.
The police department chose not to write a report. They chose not to follow their policies for referring fires of undetermined origin to SLED as per their policy for investigation. They chose not to alert the owners, which was me. I was one of the owners. They chose not to investigate the fire of a certain dollar threshold amount. I believe it's $500,000. It may be $300,000, but that should have automatically launched an arson investigator. They even chose not to. They chose not to even stay on scene. It looks like they came by and they talked to my ex for a bit, and then they left. I can't even tell you. And to make it even worse, as I started putting things together, I had essentially a whole flash drive. I mean, this is a man that's been, he's been banned from 2 tennis centers in 2 different states. He's clearly on disability for his tantrums and so forth. And On the 911 call, you can hear him pull up to the home and say, "What caused the fire?"
Hmm.
I kid you not. And I made the case to the police. Um, a child running out of a burning home that's child endangerment.
Right. Right.
Child neglect. Where's the charge? We chose
Oh,
not to do it. So in a nutshell, and I sent you this screenshot, but I have just given up on locals. They're
yeah.
tight and tight with my ex and his family, and not his family, but my ex. They go way, way back. So I went to SLED and I sent everything in a flash drive to SLED.
Mhm.
Well, SLED reviews it and they said, absolutely, this should be investigated for
Mhm.
arson. And we are going to petition the locals to see if they'll allow us to. Allow was the word. They said, we really don't have jurisdiction, which I've learned is not true. But they're like, we're going to ask. Okay, well, they asked, and not unsurprisingly, Beaufort County refused to let them investigate. Even worse, they said, we are sending all of this to Beaufort in the hopes that they will investigate. Beaufort claims that never happened. So through the process of subpoenas and FOIAs, I've gotten all the traffic, where we're sending you this. And then all of a sudden, one of them says, oh yes, I had a conversation with SLED, but we didn't perceive it. So long story short, on that front, I finally just started calling the chief of SLED, Chief Keel. Well, they don't want me to talk to him, so they route me to their chief of arson, and he's very articulate, and he's taught everybody in the state how to investigate arson, and he'll tell you that. And about an hour into that conversation, I said, the problem, sir, is that the reason there's not a crime is because you all chose to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
You all violated I don't have any due process, my civil rights. I'm throwing out all these terms that I really don't fully understand. But I'm like, I wasn't afforded this is my home. These are my children. It's just a crime because you all sucked.
Right. They didn't
And
do their job.
he says, and several times during the conversation, it's well, you need an attorney. Don't you have an attorney? I said, I don't trust attorneys at this point in time. And I said, you're dealing with me.
Mhm.
He's like, well, I can recommend a good attorney. I was like, sir, are you going to recommend an attorney to help me sue you for violating my civil rights and for not, for what is the term? Selective enforcement of laws. I said, okay, give me your recommendation, to which he kind of scoffed at. But the way we ended that conversation was, I said, sir, if somebody took me into the woods right now and shot me, would that be a crime? He said, of course it will be. And I said, well, not using your rationale. Using your rationale, sir, if there's not a police report and a referral to investigatory agencies, then a crime didn't happen. So, if my body's just sitting out there in the woods, that's not a crime. So, well, how are you going to make this right for me? Oh, Miss Granade, I don't think we can make you happy. And I was like, yeah, you can make me happy. I said, you can make me happy by petitioning the court for a search warrant of all their phones. And, I'm not asking you to investigate a rebuilt fire site. I'm not asking that. That's way too much work. I'm not asking you to do all these things. I'm asking you to just, ask for a search warrant of their phones. If they conspired to burn the house down and collect insurance money, that was mine. And I said, here's the thing too. I said, if you don't want to go arson, if you don't want to look into arson or think that arson happened, I said, just take the documentation that I've provided you, from the insurance company that show where I'm out at least $497,000. Or take the CPA, who's also a CFE, certified fraud examiner, take his affidavit that says, absolutely, this is like 6 types of fraud, charge him there. I said, I don't care what crime you charge him with, but start doing your job. So again, I'm not making friends. But I will just in summary, I'll share my success this week. I spent 3 days doing subpoena. Would you believe that I have Beaufort County signing off on a subpoena that is the county attorney's personal phone? So I have gotten the Verizon legal compliance department, and
Congratulations.
well, thank you. They were served yesterday, and I did not write the county attorney's name because I didn't have to. But I said, I want all these text messages to my ex's phone for the last 4 years. I want that.
Mhm.
So I may be on the cusp of something, Marianne. I sure hope so.
I hope so too, because I'm going to definitely have you back on. It's like your case, my case, they're all multifaceted. And, when we go to explain our cases, and what people have to understand is sometimes, like, even I'm all over the place when I tell my case because it's so
Mhm.
multifaceted. There's so much corruption that you're trying to put it in chronological order. Even me too. But you did really well, and I can't wait to have you back on because you go back into court, like in January, right? You're in
It's
there.
December the 13th.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh,
December
it's
the
good.
13th. Okay. I think you'll do well.
Well, you're sweet. I appreciate this. I'm convinced that nothing happens in the dark, and
Mhm.
my best chance is just to get the word out there.
Right,
So
and it's our job to bring it to the light, and we need people like you to be strong enough to speak out. So, after this December 13th hearing, or,
mhm.
I want you to get in contact with me so we can get you back on
Oh,
and
certainly.
update your case. So,
I'd love to, Marion.
how can people reach you?
I started a site or a page. It's called Clean Up the 14th on Facebook. And I'll be honest, I don't I go for weeks without even looking at it because
Mhm.
it does kind of suck. It
Yeah.
kind of sucks my lifeblood sometimes. But it does chronicle a lot of what I've seen and gathered, and it might be helpful to others.
Mhm.
Um, I think you have to go into these situations for people like me, and I think mine probably does have more political connections than maybe the average person going into family court. However, just don't underestimate the
Mhm.
corruption.
Right.
Do not, do not, really quickly, I mentioned the 70s when my ex was in Beaufort. Would you believe that his Cuban family all went to federal prison for drug trafficking at the same time that South Carolina natives will recognize the term Operation Jackpot, which was a
Mhm.
big, huge drug bust off the
Wow.
barrier islands of South Carolina, where my ex was, that was the drugs were being routed from South Florida and Cuba, where my ex's family was. And, where the Murdaughs involved in Operation Jackpot, that was all done by then Attorney General McMaster, who's now governor. But was my ex behind Operation Jackpot with the people that were the gentlemen smugglers and the ones that were really, making the big money like the Murdaughs back then?
Mhm.
That's an onion that needs to be peeled probably too, because those connections are,
Yeah.
and as one judge told me, Lee, we don't want to think that judicial corruption occurs, but there's no way of explaining your situation any other way.
Right. Right. Well, this has been an education. So, I can't wait to have you back on, but don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. And please join us again in the future with Lee Granade, probably sometime after December 13th, and other exciting guests. Thank you so much for talking, Lee.
Thank you, Marianne. You're so precious to have a heart for people like me and do this so selflessly. I appreciate you more than I can say.
Oh, thank you for your kind words, and we will talk again.
Wonderful. Thanks again.